The courtroom in Seattle's King County Superior Court was dead silent, save for the mocking laughter of the defense attorney. She held up a crumpled pay stub like it was a piece of trash. "Your Honor," she sneered, pointing a manicured finger at the woman in the faded cardigan. "Ms. Vance makes less in a year than my client spends on tailored suits. To grant her custody isn't just irresponsible, it's negligence." The ex-husband smirked, adjusting his Rolex, thinking he had already won. He thought he was crushing a poor waitress. He didn't know that the folder resting under her trembling hand didn't contain an apology. It contained a bank statement that would buy this entire courthouse 3 times over. October 14th, 2024. The air inside courtroom 4B was stale, smelling of floor wax and old mahogany. Outside, the Seattle rain battered against the high windows, but inside, the atmosphere was dry, suffocating, and hostile. Audrey Vance sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. She was wearing a beige dress she had bought at a consignment shop 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, but the fabric was thinning at the elbows. Across the aisle sat Marcus Thorne. He looked every inch the rising corporate star he claimed to be. A bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white collar, and that look in his eyes. That predator's look. Standing before the bench was Marcus's lawyer, Sylvia Sterling. Sylvia was known in the state of Washington as the Shredder. She charged $600 an hour, and she was currently earning every penny by systematically dismantling Audrey's dignity. "Let's look at the facts, shall we?" Sylvia walked toward the witness stand where Audrey sat, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. It sounded like a countdown. "Ms. Vance, can you confirm for the court your current occupation?" Audrey cleared her throat. Her voice was small, raspy. "I am a server at the Rusty Spoon Diner on 4th Avenue. "A server," Sylvia repeated, letting the word hang in the air with a distasteful flavor. "And your annual income, after taxes? Please, speak up so Judge Harrison can hear you." $28,000, give or take tips," Audrey whispered. Sylvia spun around to face the gallery, theatrical and sharp. $28,000. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Thorne, is the Vice President of Sales for Nebulotech. His base salary is $450,000, excluding bonuses and stock options. He lives in a gated community in Mercer Island. Ms. Vance lives in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Renton. Judge Harrison, a man with bushy gray eyebrows and a face carved from granite, looked down at Audrey over his spectacles. He didn't look sympathetic. He looked tired. "Miss Sterling, get to the point." "The point, Your Honor, is stability," Sylvia said, leaning on the railing of the jury box, though there was no jury today. This was a bench trial for assets and alimony. Ms. Vance is asking for significant alimony. She claims she helped build Mr. Thorne's career, but looking at her, lack of ambition, her financial destitute status, it is clear she is simply a leech looking for a payout. She cannot even afford a proper attorney. It was true. Audrey was represented by a court-appointed mediator, a young man named David Chen, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was shuffling papers nervously, clearly outmatched by the shark across the aisle. "I object to the characterization," David squeaked, half standing. "Overruled," Judge Harrison grunted. "Continue, Miss Sterling." Sylvia smirked. She walked back to her table and picked up a piece of paper. "We have bank statements here showing Ms. Vance's account went into overdraft 3 times in the last 6 months. Mr. Thorne, on the other hand, has a credit score of 810. He is a pillar of the community." Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. He caught Audrey's eye and winked. It was a subtle, cruel movement. "I told you," his eyes seemed to say. "I told you that you were nothing without me." "Ms. Vance," Sylvia continued, turning back to Audrey, "you claim you want what is fair. But isn't it true that during your 5-year marriage you contributed exactly $0 to the mortgage? You stayed home. You dabbled in painting. You worked odd jobs. And now you want half of Mr. Thorne's hard-earned empire?" "I supported him," Audrey said, her voice shaking but gaining a fraction of strength. I worked 2 jobs while he was getting his MBA. I paid the rent for 3 years so he could take that unpaid internship at Nebulotech. I cooked, I cleaned, I hosted his business dinners. Domestic duties, Sylvia waved her hand dismissively. Common expectations of a spouse. That does not entitle you to $500,000 in assets, Ms. Vance. In the eyes of this court, financial contribution is metric number 1. And you are, statistically speaking, financial dead weight. Laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was there. A few people in the back of the courtroom, friends of Marcus, colleagues he had brought along to witness his victory, chuckled. Audrey felt the heat rise up her neck. She felt small. She felt exactly how Marcus had spent the last 2 years making her feel worthless. I have no further questions for this witness, Sylvia said, snapping her folder shut. We move for a dismissal of the alimony request and full retention of assets for Mr. Thorne. Honestly, Your Honor, he shouldn't have to pay for her inability to succeed in life. Judge Harrison sighed and looked at the clock. Mr. Chen, do you have a cross-examination or a witness? David Chen stood up. He looked at Audrey. Audrey looked down at her hands. Underneath her hands, resting on the table, was a heavy leather portfolio. It wasn't the cheap cardboard folder David had. It was old leather, cracked with age, bearing a gold emblem that had faded over time. Audrey took a deep breath. She remembered the phone call she had received 3 days ago. She remembered the signature she had placed on the documents in the vault at the First National Bank of Seattle. She looked up at David and gave a barely perceptible nod. David straightened his tie. His demeanor changed. The nervousness evaporated, replaced by a strange, icy calm. Yes, Your Honor, David said, his voice dropping an octave. We do have one piece of evidence to submit, and we would like to call Mr. Marcus Thorne to the stand. Marcus rolled his eyes, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He swaggered to the stand, looking at the judge with a "let's get this over with" expression. Mr. Thorne, David said, walking to the center of the room, you've made it quite clear today that you value financial success, that money is the metric of a person's worth. Is that correct? It's not the only metric, Marcus said smoothly, using his corporate voice, but in a marriage, financial stability matters. I provided that. Audrey did not. So if Audrey had money, say, if she had contributed more than you, your argument about her being a leech would be invalid? Marcus laughed. A short, barking sound. If pigs could fly, Mr. Chen. But we deal in reality. Audrey waits tables. She clips coupons. I bought her a car once and she cried because she was worried about the insurance cost. She has no concept of wealth. No concept of wealth, David repeated. He walked back to the table and placed his hand on the leather portfolio. Interesting choice of words. Audrey closed her eyes. The humiliation of the last hour was burning in her chest, but it was fueling her now. She thought about the name on the papers inside that portfolio. A name she had hidden for 10 years. A name that opened doors Marcus didn't even know existed. Mock me while you can, Marcus, she thought, because you're about to find out exactly who you married. To understand the explosion that was about to happen in courtroom 4B, you have to understand the silence that existed in the marriage of Marcus and Audrey Thorne. 5 years ago, they had met in a coffee shop near the University of Washington. Audrey was wearing paint-splattered overalls. Marcus was studying for his finals. He was charming then, intense, hungry, but charming. He told her he wanted to build things, to change the skyline of Seattle. Audrey fell for the ambition. She fell for the way he looked at her, like she was the only calm thing in his chaotic world. But she had a secret. Audrey's maiden name was not just Vance. That was the name she adopted when she ran away from New York at age 19. Her birth name was Audrey Vance Holloway. The Holloways were not just rich. They were old money rich. Steel, railroads, and shipping. Her grandfather, Silas Holloway, was a man who moved markets with a sneeze. But the Holloway family was also toxic. It was a snake pit of manipulation, where affection was bought and sold. When her parents tried to arrange a marriage for her to a hedge fund manager twice her age to secure a merger, Audrey ran. She wanted to be loved for her, not her trust fund. She wanted to know that if a man held her hand, he wasn't checking for a diamond ring. She cut herself off. She lived on what she earned. She struggled. And when she met Marcus, she thought she had found it. A man who loved a waitress. A man who loved her. She almost told him. On their wedding night, sitting on the balcony of their tiny honeymoon suite in Oregon, she almost whispered, "Marcus, I can buy this hotel." But something stopped her. A little voice in her gut. He had made a comment earlier that day about one of his guests, sneering at their cheap gift. It was a flash of greed that worried her. So she decided to wait. She would tell him when they were stable. When she was sure. She never got sure. As Marcus climbed the ladder at Nebulotech, he changed. The hunger turned into gluttony. He started staying out late. He started hiding his phone. He started criticizing her clothes, her job, her friends. "You embarrass me," he had told her 6 months ago, the night the marriage truly died. They were at a corporate gala. Audrey was wearing a simple black dress. "Everyone here is wearing Prada or Gucci, Audrey. You look like you're going to a funeral for a hamster. Why can't you be more high value?" "I'm saving money for our house, Marcus," she had replied softly. "I make the money," he had shouted, right there in the lobby of the Four Seasons. "You just spend it on your pathetic art supplies. I need a partner, Audrey, not a dependent." 2 weeks later, she found the texts. Sylvia. Yes, the same Sylvia Sterling, who was currently acting as his lawyer. Marcus wasn't just hiring her, he was sleeping with her. Sylvia was everything Audrey wasn't. Sharp, rich, vicious, and obsessed with status. When Audrey confronted him, Marcus didn't apologize. He laughed. He handed her divorce papers the next morning. "Sign them," he had said. "I'm offering you a clean break. No alimony. You take your clothes and your paints, and you leave. If you try to fight me, I will bury you. I have the best lawyer in the city. You have nothing." Audrey had moved out that night. She cried for 3 days straight in her new, drafty apartment. She felt broken. She felt stupid for hiding her truth, and stupid for losing the man she loved to a woman who saw him as a bank account. But then, the letter came. It arrived via private courier 3 days before the trial. It was from the executor of the Holloway estate in New York. Her grandfather, Silas, had passed away. Audrey expected nothing. She had been disowned, or so she thought. She opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dearest Audrey," the handwritten note from the old tyrant read, "you were the only one with the guts to leave. The only one who didn't care about the money. I watched you. I watched you struggle. I watched you work. You earned my respect, child. The others are vultures. You are the lioness. Enclosed are the documents for the transfer of control." Audrey had read the documents. Then she read them again. Then she fell to the floor, not crying, but gasping for air. She wasn't just back in the will. Silas had bypassed her parents. He had bypassed her cousins. He had left the controlling interest of the Holloway Sovereign Trust to her. She wasn't just a millionaire. She was now the majority shareholder of a conglomerate that owned the land Marcus's office building stood on. She had called David Chen immediately. "David," she had said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Do not settle. We are going to court." Back in the present, inside courtroom 4B, David Chen was looking at Marcus Thorne with a predatory glint that mirrored the one Sylvia usually wore. "Mr. Thorne," David continued, pacing slowly, "you stated Ms. Vance has no concept of wealth. You also stated that you bring the financial value to this relationship. Can you tell the court the approximate valuation of your assets? Everything included. 401k, savings, the house." Marcus sighed, annoyed. "Roughly $2.4 million, give or take the market fluctuations." "Impressive," David nodded. $2.4 million. "And you believe this gives you the right to dictate Ms. Vance's worth?" "It gives me the right to protect my future from someone who didn't earn it," Marcus snapped. "Didn't earn it," David repeated. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense has rested its entire argument on the premise that Ms. Vance is destitute and therefore unfit and undeserving of respect or fair treatment. They have mocked her salary. They have mocked her job. David walked back to the table and picked up the leather portfolio. He unzipped it. The sound was like a zipper on a body bag. "We would like to introduce Evidence Exhibit C," David said loudly. A certified affidavit of assets and inheritance, authenticated this morning by the First National Bank of Seattle in the Holloway estate of New York. Sylvia Sterling stood up, frowning. "Objection, ambush, we haven't seen this document." "It was finalized an hour ago," David said. "And it is directly relevant to your financial shaming of my client." David walked up to the bench and handed the thick stack of papers to Judge Harrison. The judge took them, looking annoyed. He adjusted his glasses. He flipped the first page. Then he stopped. Judge Harrison, the man of granite, the man who hadn't smiled in 10 years, froze. His eyes widened behind his spectacles. He looked up at Audrey, then back at the paper, then back at Audrey. "Mr. Chen," the judge said, his voice sounding different. More respectful, shocked. "Is this figure correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," David said. "Is that A, B?" the judge asked, pointing to a line on the summary page. "Yes, Your Honor, that is A, B." The courtroom went dead silent. Marcus frowned. "What is going on? What is A, B?" David Chen turned to Marcus, a massive grin breaking across his face. "Mr. Thorne, you claimed my client brings nothing to the table. I am pleased to inform you that as of 9 a.m. this morning, Ms. Audrey Vance is the sole beneficiary of the Holloway Sovereign Trust." David paused for effect. "Her current net worth is valued at $4.2 billion. The word billion hung in the air of courtroom 4B like a guillotine blade that had just dropped but hadn't hit the neck yet. It was a suspended reality. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The court reporter stopped typing, her mouth slightly agape. The bailiff, a bored-looking man who usually spent trials thinking about his lunch, straightened up so fast his spine cracked audibly. Marcus Thorne sat frozen. His brain was trying to process the information, but it was rejecting it like a bad organ transplant. Audrey? His Audrey? The woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent? That's... Marcus's voice cracked. He cleared it, trying to regain his alpha composure, but he sounded like a frightened child. "That's a mistake. It's a typo." "You mean 4.2 million? Even that is impossible." "It is not a typo, Mr. Thorne." Quote, Judge Harrison said. The judge was no longer looking at Marcus with the indifference of a man processing paperwork. He was looking at the situation with the gravity it deserved. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I am looking at a certified letter from the Holloway Sovereign Trust. It lists cash reserves, real estate holdings in Manhattan, London, and Tokyo, and a diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks. And the beneficiary is one Audrey Vance Holloway." Sylvia Sterling, the shark, was the first to recover. Her eyes darted back and forth, calculating. She didn't look at Marcus with lust or admiration anymore. She looked at the portfolio on the table as if it were a piece of meat, and she was starving. "Your Honor," Sylvia stammered, standing up. Her smooth, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a frantic, grasping energy. If this is true, then this is a marital asset. They are still legally married. This fortune was acquired during the union. My client is entitled to 50%. Equitable distribution laws in Washington state are clear. Marcus's head snapped up. Hope ignited in his eyes. A greedy, desperate light. "Right. Yes. We're married. That's community property. I want my half." "She hid assets. That's fraud." Audrey stood up. She didn't ask for permission. She simply rose, and for the first time in 5 years, she stood at her full height. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was a Holloway. "It is not community property," Audrey said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room without a tremor. "David?" David Chen smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been holding a royal flush while his opponent bet the deed to his house on a pair of twos. "Actually, Ms. Sterling," David said, pulling another document from his folder. "As I'm sure you know, inheritance is considered separate property in the state of Washington. provided it has not been commingled. Ms. Vance has not placed a single cent of this money into a joint account. In fact, the transfer of control was finalized at 9 a.m. this morning. You filed the official separation of assets motion yesterday. David leaned forward, locking eyes with Sylvia. You were so eager to protect Mr. Thorne's precious 401k and his miserable checking account that you filed an emergency motion to freeze the marital estate as of yesterday's date. You successfully argued that any assets acquired after that date are separate. Sylvia's face went pale. She remembered. She had done it to stop Audrey from supposedly draining Marcus's accounts before the trial. You played yourself, David whispered, though in the silent courtroom it sounded like a shout. By your own motion, anything Audrey received today is hers, and hers alone. Marcus gets nothing. Not a dime, not a penny. Marcus turned to Sylvia, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. Is that true, Sylvia? Is that true? Sylvia ignored him, flipping frantically through her notes, looking for a loophole, a technicality, anything. But there was nothing. She had built an ironclad wall to keep Audrey out, and now that wall was keeping Marcus out of a billion-dollar fortune. Mr. Thorne, Judge Harrison spoke, his voice booming. Sit down. Marcus sank into his chair. He felt like he couldn't breathe. $4 billion. He did the math in his head. Half of that would have been $2 billion. He could have bought Nebulotech. He could have bought his own island. And he had lost it because he wanted to save a few $1,000s in alimony. Ms. Sterling, the judge continued, your motion for dismissal of alimony is interesting in light of these events. I assume Ms. Vance is no longer requesting spousal support? No, Your Honor, Audrey said softly. I don't need his money. I never did. I just wanted him to care. Very well, the judge said. He looked at Marcus with distinct distaste. Mr. Thorne, you came into this courtroom mocking this woman. You belittled her employment. You shamed her financial status. You wasted the court's time with arrogant posturing. The judge picked up his gavel. I am granting the divorce. Each party retains the assets currently in their name. Mr. Thorne keeps his $2.4 million and his debt. Ms. Vance keeps her inheritance. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne, since you were so adamant about financial responsibility, I am ordering you to pay Ms. Vance's legal fees. What? Marcus shrieked. She's a billionaire. Why should I pay her legal fees? Because, Judge Harrison smiled a thin, cold smile, you acted in bad faith. And because, Mr. Thorne, it's the law, you will pay Mr. Chen's bill in full within 30 days. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Marcus sat there, stunned, as the reality washed over him. He wasn't just divorced. He was the man who had thrown away a winning lottery ticket because he thought it was a gum wrapper. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was bustling. Lawyers were running to appointments. Criminals were being led in handcuffs. But as Audrey pushed through the heavy oak doors, the air felt fresher, lighter. She walked fast. She wanted to get to the elevator, get to her car, which was still a 2010 Honda Civic, and just breathe. Audrey! Audrey, wait! She didn't stop. She heard the frantic clicking of heels and the heavy thud of expensive Italian leather shoes running on marble. Marcus caught up to her near the water fountains. He grabbed her arm. Don't touch me, Audrey said. She didn't shout, but the command was so sharp that Marcus recoiled as if he'd been burned. Audrey, please, Marcus panted. He was sweating. His hair was disheveled. The arrogant corporate VP was gone. In his place was a desperate salesman trying to close a deal that had already walked out of the store. We need to talk. This is crazy. We can't just end it like this. We ended it 6 months ago, Marcus, when you slept with your lawyer. Remember? Audrey said, continuing to walk toward the elevators. Sylvia Sterling came running up behind them, breathless. Mr. Thorne, I advise you not to speak without. Shut up, Sylvia, Marcus roared, spinning on her. You lost me $2 billion. You're fired. Get away from me. Sylvia stopped, shocked. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. She glared at him, straightened her jacket, and hissed, "You'll be hearing from my lawyers about my unpaid bill, Marcus." She turned on her heel and stormed off. Marcus turned back to Audrey, putting on his best puppy dog face. It was a look that used to work on her. He reached out, trying to take her hand. "Babe, look, I was stressed. The job, the pressure, it made me crazy, but I never stopped loving you. I was just pushing you. I wanted us to be a power couple. And look, now we can be. Think of what we can do together. You have the capital, I have the business mind. We can rule Seattle. We can get back together. I'll tear up the divorce papers. We can renew our vows next week. Hawaii, Paris, wherever you want." Audrey pressed the down button on the elevator. She watched the numbers count down. 5, 4. She turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the greed in his eyes. It wasn't love. It was hunger. He didn't see a wife. He saw an ATM. "You think I'm stupid, Marcus?" she asked quietly. No, never. You're brilliant. You're a Holloway. Why didn't you tell me? I would have treated you like a queen." "That's exactly the point," Audrey said. The elevator doors dinged open. She stepped inside and turned around to face him. He tried to step in with her, but David Chen stepped in front of him, blocking the entrance with his shoulder. "You would have treated me like a queen because of the money," Audrey said through the closing doors. "I wanted a husband who treated me like a queen when I was a waitress." "You failed the test, Marcus." "Audrey, we can fix this! I love you!" Marcus screamed, banging his fist on the closing metal doors. "Goodbye, Marcus," she whispered. The doors shut, sealing him out. Audrey leaned back against the elevator wall and let out a long, shaky breath. David looked at her, concern on his face. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Audrey said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. "Actually, I'm better than fine." "David, what is the first thing a majority shareholder does when they take over a company?" David blinked, confused by the pivot. Usually they review the board of directors. Why?" "The Holloway Trust," Audrey said, her eyes hardening. "It has a diverse portfolio. Do you recall if Nebulotech is in that portfolio?" David pulled out his phone, scrolling through the digital files of the assets she had just inherited. He swiped twice, then stopped. He looked up at her, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, look at that," David chuckled. "The Holloway Trust owns the commercial real estate firm, Apex Properties. And Apex Properties owns the Skyline Tower at 5th and Madison." Audrey nodded. "That's the Nebulotech headquarters." "It is," David confirmed. "Your trust is technically Marcus's landlord." "No," Audrey corrected him as the elevator reached the lobby. "My trust is the landlord of the building, but I recall seeing something else in the file. Something about venture capital." David scrolled further. "Yes, Holloway Ventures. They were an angel investor in Nebulotech's Series B funding round. They hold a 15% voting stake in the company board." Audrey walked out of the elevator and into the rainy Seattle afternoon. The paparazzi weren't there yet. The story hadn't leaked, but they would be soon. She put on her sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. 15% is enough to call for an emergency board meeting," Audrey said coolly. "And as the landlord, I think I have some concerns about the ethical conduct of the senior leadership housed in my building." David scrambled to keep up with her. "Audrey, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that Marcus loves his job more than anything in the world," Audrey said, unlocking her old Honda Civic. "He thinks he's untouchable because he makes the company money. But I think the board might be interested to know that their VP of sales just publicly humiliated a major shareholder in open court." She opened the car door and looked back at David. "Get in, David. We have a board meeting to crash." October 14th, 1 p.m. Marcus Thorne was back in his element. Or so he tried to convince himself. The glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of the Nebulotech Tower offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, the very skyline he had claimed he wanted to own. He was currently sweating through his undershirt, standing at the head of the mahogany table. Seated around him were the sharks of the tech world, the board of directors. At the far end sat Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Nebulotech. Arthur was a man who smiled with his mouth, but never with his eyes. "So, Marcus," Arthur said, tapping a silver pen against the table, "you missed the morning strategy session? Personal issues, I hear?" Marcus forced a laugh. It sounded brittle. "Just wrapping up the divorce, Arthur. You know how it is. Cleaning house. Getting rid of the dead weight so I can focus 100% on Q4 targets." "Dead weight," Arthur mused. "That's one way to put it. I heard a rumor that the proceedings were colorful." "Exaggerations," Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "She was emotional, but it's done. I retained all my assets. The company is safe from any spousal entanglements. I am fully focused." "Good," Arthur said, "because we have a situation. We've received a notification from Apex Properties, our landlord. Apparently, there's been a change in the ownership structure of the building. They've called for an emergency audit of the lease agreement, and frankly, with our stock dipping, we can't afford a rent hike." Marcus frowned. "Apex? I can handle them. I'll take the new owner out for a steak dinner, flash the sales projections. I can charm anyone, Arthur. You know that." "I hope so," Arthur said, "because the representative is on their way up now." The double glass doors to the conference room didn't just open. They were pushed wide by two large men in dark suits. Private security. Marcus stood up, annoyed. "Excuse me, this is a closed board meeting. You can't just—" Then she walked in. It wasn't the Audrey from the courtroom. The beige cardigan was gone. In the hour since the trial, Audrey had stopped at the Holloway Estates Seattle penthouse, a property she didn't even know she owned until David Chen handed her the keys. She was wearing a structured midnight blue power suit that looked like it had been cut from the night sky. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was loose and cascading in waves. She wore no jewelry except for a single vintage diamond brooch on her lapel, the Holloway crest. Behind her walked David Chen, who looked like he was having the best day of his life, carrying a sleek metal briefcase. The room went silent. Marcus blinked. He rubbed his eyes. "Audrey," he whispered. Then, remembering his audience, his face turned red. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Arthur, this is her. This is the ex-wife I was telling you about. She's stalking me. Call security." Audrey didn't look at Marcus. She looked straight at Arthur Pendleton. She walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the seat reserved for the majority investor. "Mr. Pendleton," Audrey said. Her voice was cool, polished, unrecognizable from the woman who had whispered her salary earlier that day. "I apologize for the interruption, but as the new owner of Apex Properties and the controlling voice of Holloway Ventures, I felt it was necessary to oversee this meeting personally." Arthur Pendleton dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the glass table. "Holloway," Arthur stammered. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, a sign of immense respect. "Ms. Ms. Holloway, we weren't aware that the transition had been finalized." "It was finalized this morning," Audrey said, taking the seat. She gestured for David to sit beside her. "Please, sit down, Arthur." Marcus was still standing, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Wait a minute. This is a joke, right? Arthur, why are you standing up for her? She's a waitress. She serves pancakes." "Sit down, Marcus," Arthur barked, his face pale. He turned back to Audrey with a terrified smile. "Ms. Holloway, to what do we owe the pleasure? We were just discussing Q4 sales targets." Audrey interlaced her fingers on the table. She finally turned her gaze to Marcus. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of absolute, crushing indifference. "I'm not here for sales targets, Arthur," she said. "I'm here to discuss a liability, a significant human resources liability that threatens the reputation of this company." "Liability?" Arthur asked nervously. "Yes," Audrey said. "It has come to my attention that your vice president of sales has a history of financial fraud, perjury, and public misconduct." Marcus slammed his hands on the table. "That's a lie. You can't talk to me like that here. I built this department." "Did you?" Audrey asked calmly. "Or did you build it on the back of a wife you exploited, while sleeping with your lawyer to hide assets?" She turned back to Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton, Holloway Ventures holds a 15% stake in Nebulotech. We also own the lease on this building. My family has a strict moral clause for the companies we invest in. We do not do business with liars. And we certainly do not entrust our capital to men who abuse their power to humiliate those with less financial standing. Audrey reached into the briefcase David had opened. She pulled out a transcript of the court proceedings from that morning. This is the court record. She slid it down the long table. It stopped right in front of Arthur. Read the part where Mr. Thorne mocks the income of a working-class woman. Read the part where he attempts to defraud the court regarding his assets. Arthur picked up the transcript. He read in silence. The other board members leaned in, whispering. Marcus looked around the room. The respect he had cultivated for years was evaporating. The other directors were looking at him not as a leader, but as a contagion. Audrey, baby. Marcus tried again, his voice trembling. Don't do this. Not at work. This is my life. No, Marcus, Audrey said softly. This was your life. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, pressurized. Arthur Pendleton finished reading the transcript. He looked at Marcus, then at Audrey. He was a businessman. He did the math instantly. On one side, Marcus Thorne, a good sales VP, but replaceable. On the other side, the Holloway fortune, their biggest investor, and their landlord who could triple their rent tomorrow. It wasn't even a choice. Arthur cleared his throat. He looked at Marcus with cold, dead eyes. Marcus, Arthur said. Arthur, come on, Marcus pleaded, sweat dripping down his temple. It's a domestic dispute. It has nothing to do with my performance. It has everything to do with your judgment, Arthur said sharply. You perjured yourself? You hid assets? If you can't be honest with a judge, how can we trust you with our compliance reports? How can we trust you with client funds? Arthur turned to the head of HR, who was sitting in the corner taking frantic notes. Mrs. Gable, what is the severance protocol for termination with cause? Termination? Marcus shrieked. You can't fire me. I have a contract. Your contract has a morality clause, Audrey pointed out. She knew this because she had read the standard Nebulotech executive agreement in the car ride over. Conduct unbecoming of an officer of the company. I believe public humiliation of a spouse and attempted fraud qualifies. It does, Mrs. Gable confirmed, not looking at Marcus. Termination with cause means no severance, immediate effect. Stock options are forfeited. Marcus felt his knees give out. He slumped into his chair. My options? Those are worth... That's my retirement. That was your retirement, David Chen chimed in, unable to help himself. Technically, since they haven't vested, they revert to the company pool. Marcus looked at Audrey. His eyes were red, filled with a mix of hatred and begging. Audrey, please. You have billions. You don't need to do this. Just let me resign. Let me keep my reputation. Audrey stood up. She walked slowly around the table until she was standing right behind him. She leaned down, close to his ear. You told me I had no concept of wealth, Marcus, she whispered. You were right. I didn't. I thought wealth was money. But I learned today that wealth is power. The power to protect yourself from bullies. She straightened up and looked at the security guards standing by the door. Gentlemen, Audrey said, Mr. Thorne is no longer an employee of Nebulotech. Please escort him from the building. Ensure he takes nothing but his personal car keys. You can't do this, Marcus screamed as the guards moved in. I'm the VP. I'm the VP. One of the guards, a burly man named Frank, who Marcus had yelled at last week for checking his ID too slowly, grabbed Marcus by the arm. Let's go, Mr. Thorne, Frank said, not gently. Get your hands off me, Marcus thrashed, knocking over his expensive leather chair. Arthur, help me! Arthur Pendleton didn't even look up. He was already reviewing the Holloway portfolio, trying to find a way to impress his new boss. Marcus was dragged, literally dragged toward the glass doors. He looked back one last time at Audrey. She was standing at the head of the table, the city of Seattle framed behind her like a throne. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She just looked done. The doors swung shut. Marcus's shouting was muffled. then silenced as he was hauled down the hallway toward the freight elevator. Audrey let out a breath. She looked at her hands. They were steady. "Miss Holloway," Arthur said, breaking the tension, "now that unpleasantness is handled. About the lease?" Audrey looked at Arthur. She saw the fear in him. She saw the same corporate sycophancy that had created Marcus. "We'll discuss the lease next week, Arthur," Audrey said. "Mr. Chen will be my point of contact. Right now, I have somewhere to be." "Of course," Arthur nodded vigorously. "Anything you need." Audrey walked out of the conference room, David trailing behind her. They walked in silence to the elevator. When the doors closed, isolating them from the corporate shark tank, David let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to make you angry," David said. Audrey leaned her head back against the wall. "I wasn't angry, David. That was the sad part. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. He was just a small man in a big suit." So David checked his watch. "You're a billionaire. You just fired your ex-husband, and you own a skyscraper. It's 2 p.m. What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" Audrey thought about it. She thought about the painting supplies in her tiny apartment. She thought about the diner where she had worked for 6 years, serving coffee to people who looked through her like she was glass. "I want to go to the diner," Audrey said. David blinked. "The Rusty Spoon? You want to buy it?" "No," Audrey smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I have a shift at 3 o'clock, and I need to quit properly. And there's a dishwasher there, an old man named Henry. He's been trying to save for a hearing aid for 2 years. David smiled back. "I think Henry is about to have a very good day." "Yes," Audrey said as the elevator reached the lobby. "I think he is." The Rusty Spoon Diner smelled exactly as it always did: burnt coffee, bacon grease, and lemon floor cleaner. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled air of the Nebulotech boardroom, but to Audrey, it smelled like honesty. It was 2:55 p.m. The lunch rush was dying down. When Audrey pushed open the door, the little bell chimed. Ding-ling. Big Mike, the manager who had hired Audrey when she was desperate and broke, looked up from the cash register. He was a large man with grease stains on his apron and a heart of gold buried under layers of gruffness. He squinted at her. "Audrey?" Mike asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "You look different. You got a funeral or a wedding?" Audrey looked down at her midnight blue suit, the fabric shimmering slightly under the fluorescent lights. "Something like that, Mike. I just came from court." "The divorce?" Mike softened. "How'd it go, kid? He take you to the cleaners?" Audrey smiled. It was a secret, knowing smile. "No, Mike. I think I came out okay." She walked behind the counter, bypassing the apron hook. She went straight to the kitchen. In the back, standing over a steaming sink of dirty dishes, was Henry. Henry was 72 years old. He had arthritis in his hands and ears that failed him more every day. He worked 6 days a week just to pay for a small room in a boarding house. He didn't hear Audrey come in. He was scrubbing a pot, humming a tune only he could hear. "Henry," Audrey said softly. He didn't turn. She tapped him gently on the shoulder. Henry jumped, spinning around with a soapy plate in his hand. When he saw her, his wrinkled face broke into a toothless smile. "Audrey, you're back! I saved you a slice of pie. Blueberry, your favorite." Audrey felt tears prick her eyes. In a world where her husband had thrown her away for a promotion, this man, who had nothing, had saved her a piece of pie. "Henry," she said, leaning in so he could hear her clearly, "I have to tell you something. I'm quitting today." Henry's face fell. "Oh, I knew it. That husband of yours, did he make you move?" "No," Audrey shook her head. "I'm moving on my own, but I couldn't leave without giving you my 2 weeks' notice and my tip out." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't a check. It was a cashier's check she had David Chen draw up at the bank on the way over. She pressed it into Henry's soapy, wet hand. "What's this?" Henry squinted, wiping his hand on his pants to hold the paper. "Open it." Henry unfolded the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He stared at the number. $500,000. Henry froze. He looked at the paper, then at Audrey, then back at the paper. He started to shake. Audrey, this says 500,000. Is this a joke? Is this one of those prank lottery tickets? It's not a joke, Henry, Audrey said, her voice thick with emotion. It's for the hearing aids, and the house, and the retirement. You don't have to scrub another pot, Henry. You're done. But where? How? Henry stammered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dishwater suds. My grandfather left me a gift, Audrey whispered, hugging the old man who smelled like dish soap and kindness. And now I'm sharing it with the only family I really have. She let go of Henry, who was sobbing openly now, holding the check to his chest like a shield. Audrey walked back out to the front. Big Mike was watching, mouth agape. He had seen the transaction. Audrey, Mike said, his voice quiet. Who are you? Audrey stopped at the door. She looked at the diner, the cracked vinyl booths, the scuffed floor. It was the place that had sheltered her when she was hiding from her past, but she didn't need to hide anymore. I'm just a girl who got lucky, Mike, she said. Oh, and the drinks are on me today. For everyone. She walked out the door, the bell chiming one last time. Dingling. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds over Seattle were breaking, revealing patches of brilliant blue sky. David Chen was waiting by her car, leaning against the hood. Mission accomplished? David asked. Mission accomplished, Audrey nodded. So, David opened the door for her. Where to now, Miss Holloway? Audrey looked at the skyline. Somewhere in that glass tower, Marcus was packing a box, wondering where it all went wrong. But she wasn't looking at the tower anymore. She was looking past it, toward the mountains, toward the future. Let's go to the art supply store, David, Audrey said, getting into the car. I have a lot of painting to catch up on. As they drove away, leaving the rusty spoon and the old life behind, Audrey realized that for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't defined by her name, her money, or her husband. She was finally, truly free. This story isn't just about a billion-dollar inheritance. It's a reminder that true worth is never found in a bank account. Marcus Thorne had everything society tells us to value, money, status, and power, but he lacked the basic human decency that makes a person truly rich. Audrey, even when she was just a waitress, carried herself with dignity and kindness. In the end, the tables turned, not because of luck, but because character always reveals itself. Marcus lost everything because he underestimated the quiet woman serving him dinner, teaching us all a valuable lesson. Never look down on anyone, because you never know who they really are or who they might become. If you enjoyed Audrey's journey from the diner to the boardroom, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. What would you do if you discovered you were a secret billionaire? Would you forgive your ex, or would you do exactly what Audrey did? Let me know your revenge plans in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about karma, justice, and the truth coming to light. Thanks for watching.